Thank you so much, David, for this very, very fascinating presentation. I think a lot of us will have many questions for you. I have a few questions for all of the panelists, but I don't want to be selfish. I want to open it to the floor first. So if anyone in the audience here in person has any questions, does anyone have any questions? Yes, please. Yeah.
Hello. My question is for our last speaker, for David. Thanks to you and, again, to all of our speakers for your wonderful talks. And I particularly enjoyed in David's talk how good an account he gave us of the many things which the UAE government, regime, state gets out of these practices and this arrangement. You've also sort of hinted at some of the things which are conspicuously modern in their state-centrism of the religio-political stance of these ostensibly traditionalist figures. I'd like to know more, and would be grateful if you could tell us some more, about what they get out of it, people like Bin Baye or Hamza Yusuf, how they understand this. I mean, you've said they get support, finance, what have you, for their projects, but what might those be? How do they understand themselves? Because I dare say they don't see themselves simply as being fuqaha, sultan, and sort of working at the state's behest, that they actually have some high-minded things behind this. So a bit more about that in particular, or in general, and perhaps in particular, about their understanding of what violence is, and particularly here when you've talked about war, is it just war? Is it pacifism they're talking about here rather than non-violence? Or have they any recognition at all about things like structural violence in their thought or in their work for this forum? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that.
Can we just take a few more questions? Anyone online has any questions? Okay, so there are no questions online. I just want to ask the panelists a few questions, and then we can sort of answer all the questions together. So I want to ask Saif, you mentioned radicalization and de-radicalization as if they're almost given terms. What are the markers of radicalization and de-radicalization? Is it ideology or commitment to violence? Because you do have people that have quote-unquote moderate ideologies that have engaged in acts of violence as a form of revenge, and then you have people who are quote-unquote ideologically radical but have not engaged in violence. And my second question for Saif is, what is the state's response to these grassroots in-prison de-radicalization projects? Are they supportive of it? Are they fearful of it, and why? And for Dr. Affan, I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on the Muslim Brotherhood's usage or adoption, partial or not, to the thought of Gene Sharp and how that impacts their view on violence. And for Mr. Hesham Gaafar, I want to ask, what is the importance of non-violence in dialogue? And then lastly, I want to ask David, so you talked quite a bit about state branding and the uses of nonviolence. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how theoretically or even theologically the notions of nonviolence in these contexts can be linked straight to authoritarianism? I think let's start with David and then move back, because he has a few things to answer.
Thank you so much, Walaa, and for those questions. And I'll just be brief, because there's always so much more we could talk about on these themes. So just in terms of the first question, it seems that we can think about it in one way. What is there to be gained from engaging with a state of this nature by scholars such as Abdullah bin Baye and Hamza Yusuf? What we're thinking about it is in terms of what is sometimes called of the fragmentation of authority, periods across the course of the 20th century, as a new entity emerges called the nation state that begins to appropriate and sponsor and involve itself increasingly in religious life in a way that pre-modern empires simply could not do. As a result of that, new actors and voices began to enter and speak about Islam in a normative way. There's a long history of that. And this is a cause of anxiety for many among the ulama, not just these particular figures. And so it's their reason for wanting support from these states is a particular understanding of what the solution to this problem is, this increasing diversification of normative voices in the Islamic sphere as they understand it. So it's a particular kind of circular reasoning, but over the past few decades, as nation states have involved themselves in religious life, increasingly the public has become increasingly suspicious of various Islamic voices. But, by a certain curious reasoning, these particular ulama understand the solution to this problem of increasing diversity or fragmentation of Islamic voices as more state support for their particular projects. So it's, in their view, a solution to a particular problem as they understand it, which is this increasing diversity and diversification of voices that are articulate and articulating different Islamic views in the public sphere writ large. In terms of Walaa's question about how is non-violence articulated in a theoretical or theological context, one way of thinking about it is there was this sort of view, a particular sort of distorted view of pre-modern ulama as aligning themselves with the Sultan and advocating a kind of quietism, which is not what these scholars do. Abdullah bin Bayya sort of articulates a view that the public have a right to accountability and justice from their governments. But rather, his particular argument that he puts is that peace, which he understands as the absence of direct violence, as opposed to structural violence, other forms of violence that were mentioned here, he understands peace as the absence of direct violence, people actually fighting each other and killing each other and so on. And for him, peace, by which he means the absence of direct violence, is the first condition in which everything else must flow. Okay? Without that, nothing else can be discussed and nothing else can happen. So that's his basic understanding of what peace is the absence of violence first, before anything else can be discussed. Now, of course, one can argue that, or it appears that in his view, he talks about the public waiving their right to justice for the sake of peace. So it's not that they have no rights, they do, they just have to choose to offset this justice and accountability to some point in the future, and we don't know when that ever would be. And that is the basic point, that for him, everything else has to come after that, before any discussion of justice and accountability can occur. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. I think let's go to Saif now. We're just waiting for Omar, the interpreter, to come back. Take it away.
Thank you, Walaa, for your amazing questions. But before I answer them, I have to say Assalamu alaikum to Dr. Mohammad Affan and to Mr. Hesham Gaafar. I'm really happy to see you online, and hope so, inshallah, we can meet face-to-face in person soon. Your first question is, it's a very fascinating one, because the radicalization here is not only monopolized to the Islamists inside the prison. It's not just to the Islamic prisoners. There are some other prisoners from other backgrounds, from other ideological backgrounds, I mean, secular or liberals or something like this. They tend to adopt the radicalization process or the radicalization view. So the radicalization here, or the radicalism, is not an ideology, it's a worldview or a view of regime change. So first of all, I was asking, I didn't ask the prisoners, are you radical or you are non-radical? I was asking him, what's your view of changing the regime? So some of them, they said, we have to go through the armed struggle or the armed struggle. It's something remind us of the communists in 1970s, you know, and they looked for other models to the people in Spain during the Civil War, were some other Latin models in the last century. So they were not seeking the model of Taliban in 1994 or other Islamic components in the north of Syria. Other questions I was asking them to indicate whether they are radical or non-radical is what's your possession from the other components of the Egyptian society, such as the Christians and the other religions or the other ideologies in the Egyptian society. So and how can we deal with them? How can we deal with the regime if you want the struggle through your own way? So here it's a strategy, and for me it's something like the populism. It's a strategy. It's not an ideology. So and the second question here: how did the state react to the radical wave or the radicalization inside the prison? Here is a good thing that indicates that this regime is not seeking for the common good of the society or the common good of the political components, or there is a narrative that this regime is leaving on the terrorism narrative, or they are showing the other parts or the other states or the international organizations that I have radical people and I'm I am imprisoning them, so I have to continue repressing the other components of the society. In Tora prison, I interviewed like some of the ex-prisoners there, and they were saying that the police or the authorities or the what they call al-mabahis of the prison, they weren't deal with the ISIS prisoners, and they were letting them do whatever they want because they were fearing them. However, they were repressing the moderate Muslims. So, or the moderate Islamic prisoners.
So just because we're running out of time, I do want to ask you and Affan a question that was asked to us. So let me get the question. So do the Muslim Brotherhood themselves use the term radicalization or de-radicalization, or are these terms applied by people like us to categorize their ideology or practice? If not, then are we framing their ideology and practice in terms defined by political powers, especially the U.S. after 9/11 or the Egyptian state? And I think that's a very, very important question. So let me just go to Dr. Affan first, and then see if you could just like say one small thing about it, and then, yeah.
Thank you, Walaa. Yes, I received two questions. First, related to the Gene-child issue, and I was interested in my research about radicalization within Muslim Brotherhood. I was stressing on different aspects: organizational remodeling and strategic changes, as well as the idea of changing in their educational curricula, المناهج التربوية. And I did many interviews asking the members of Muslim Brotherhood at that time how your weekly meeting, the Oslo meeting, or your organizational cell meeting, how this meeting was changed at that time. And the first observation, it was interrupted. It was not as regular as it used to be before the coup. The second, that the only systematic change that happened, that it was mainly religious. So the curricula had some stress or emphasis in certain verses in Quran, on some jurisprudential issues related to jihad and muqawama. Then the third part related to the tools of non-violence and tool of resistance, and this mostly came as a personal initiative. So many people in the Oslo meetings, they produced some books related to the revolutionary actions or revolutionary experiences in previous cases, and including the non-violence war of Jean Charles. And this was, of course, the radicalization was more or less intense, and as I said, the Oslo meeting or the weekly meeting of the certain groups were interrupted. But at the end, for the first time, you can see that within the Oslo, some literature on revolution, some literature on non-violence resistance became part of the curricula, even if it came out of personal initiative, not systematically adopted by Muslim Brotherhood. So, as I told you, this was the answer of many people. I interviewed them during my research. The question of radicalism and de-radicalism, of course, no, this is an academic term. I use these terms to describe the changes that happened within the organization. But during the debate between the competing factions within Muslim Brotherhood, two different terms were used. Al-Janah al-Thawri, or the revolutionary wing. So the radical leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood at that time, they framed themselves as if they are the wing that is trying to continue the revolutionary war. So they framed themselves as revolutionary trend or al-Thawri or revolutionary wing, al-Janah al-Thawri of Muslim Brotherhood. And now even the remnant of them, they are using al-Taghyir, or the change trend, the trend of change. On the other hand, the senior leaders or the old guards of Muslim Brotherhood, they used the term of Tayyar. So they accuse the others to being adopting al-Unf or violence. So they are the violent trend or the violent faction. So the term of radicalism and de-radicalism were not, of course, used during the debate between leaders and members of Muslim Brotherhood during this period. But they used, as I said, revolutionary versus violent trend, just to frame the non-violent means adopted by certain leaders within Muslim Brotherhood.
Thank you. I just want to go to Mr. Hesham Gaafar, responding to the question of the role of non-violence.
Thank you. I think the main issue in this, or the main topic, this panel, I think it's related with what we can call violence and the context. Because sometimes we use a dialogue to deal with what we can call cultural elements. I think this is the wrong way. What I recognize in this panel, that is there is a relation between the context and the radical. But I also need to revisit the term of radical. I think we need to distinguish between radical and using violence. Because I am ex-prisoner, I am now radical. Radical of thinking, radical of seeing the things, radical to support the change. And also I think it will be very important thing. But I didn't think to use violence. And I need to mention for something related to what we can call the conflict about the spirit of Islam after Arab Spring. I think we need to recognize what the Arab Spring is using. As the last panelist mentioned, we are talking about supporting democratic elements, or democratic approach, and also social justice. This is the main topics in the Arab Spring. So I now evaluate, and this is the last article which I wrote about, which is Islam is supporting, or Islamic thoughts supporting a change in the MENA region after Arab Spring or not. I think all of what we can call types of Islam or Islamic thoughts in the region supporting stability, not changing. Changing mean here is Arab Spring narrative. It's democratic and social justice. So we also need to recognize not the EU model for Islam and also the other models, because they are using violence as states, not non-organizations only, but the states, like Syria, like Yemen, Turkey using in Syria, Saudi Arabia, and also EU using it in Yemen, etc., in Libya. So all of actors, state or non-states, using violence. They are introducing what we can call neoliberal Islam, and also they are using the tolerance as a branding for the world, but they are not tolerant at all with their citizenship. So this is also, we need to recognize the context of all of these, because they bring thoughts, and sometimes they make sharta and they make declarations about Islam and tolerance, etc. But in the practice, they are not at all tolerant. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hesham. That was really, really interesting. And I think it's similar to the argument that Dr. David tried to explain. So just 2 minutes, Saif. The use of radicalization, can you take it?
I didn't get your question again.
We asked about the term radicalization and the framing of the term radicalization.
Yeah, I said it's a strategy for me. It's not, and I'm confirming here what like Mr. Hesham has said about the radicalization or the radical view of a change. Okay, but I redefined what I mean here in this paper by radicalization. It's, the use of violence for change. But the radicalization here, we can define it in the beginning of the paper, or in the beginning of my presentation, I stated what I mean by radicalization here, or what I mean by the radical way. I don't mean the other strategies of the radical views. We all have radical views to change. We have radical views to trade with the terrorism. We have radical views to trade with the state repression. But what's the radical strategy here, which can be converted to an action, and we have like what Dr. Mohammad Affan has mentioned in his presentation, starting from Molotov movement to other parts and other voluntary parts also, which we don't know about. When I was working on the student activism in Egypt after 2013, I found out that some of the high school students in some suburbs or in some rural areas, they were working voluntarily against the police, and they were doing some, not operations, but some sort of resistance against the police when they were breaking in their houses, when they were breaking in their villages by bunch of cars, bunch of 4x4 cars, and they were breaking into their villages to detain someone and to spread the terrorism against the students, against the kids, and against the people of this village. So they started to resist them by using the Molotovs, by using the other stuff. So can I say here that they are radical people? No, they use the radical strategy or radical actions or radical tactics against this regime. So we have here to differentiate between two things, and